Hey garden friends, welcome back to So Arizona. As you can see, I am in a little bit different background than I normally am. I am not out in the garden. I am next to my seed starting setup in my house. And that is because it is time to start planting tomato seeds. In fact, it's been time to start planting tomato seeds since December. So if you haven't started your seeds yet, you still have a little bit of time if you act fast. And if not, some of the things that I talk about in this video are going to help you select a great seedling variety at local plant sales or nurseries if you don't have time to start your own seeds. So I already gave it away. Today we're talking about tomatoes, and tomatoes are the most popular vegetable to grow in gardens across the US. But I know how difficult it can be to grow a perfect tomato in our desert climate. It can be so disappointing to spend time and energy and money planting out tomatoes only to get nothing in return. Today, I'm going to be talking about some key factors to consider when you're picking out your tomato variety. Rather than give you a list of tomato varieties to try, which I have done in the past and will continue to do in the future because I love sharing with you, I think that it will be most helpful to teach you some of the key terms to look for when picking tomatoes that will perform well in our climate. This video is the first in a series of tomato growing videos that I have lined up for you. I have 4 so far in the works, so look for those to come out every Friday afternoon for the next several weeks. When you're shopping for tomato seeds or seedlings, look for terms like heat tolerant or heat set, early, cherry, grape, and plum. These terms can be found in catalogs and on websites and on seed packets, so as you're choosing your tomatoes, really be looking for those key terms. Notice that these terms describe tomatoes that are of the smaller variety rather than those coveted big beefsteak tomatoes that we all dream about. This has to do with Southern Arizona's climate. And to understand that, we need to talk a little bit about tomato development. When tomato plants set fruit, that's when a tomato blossom is pollinated, and that happens most often just from the wind, but sometimes from buzz pollination when large insects like bumblebees land on the flower and vibrate it with their wings. And when that happens, the tomatoes will set fruit, but it has to be at a specific temperature for them to do so successfully. Tomato plants set fruit when overnight temperatures are between 50 and 70 degrees. So as you're seeing your tomato plants develop those beautiful yellow flowers, those flowers, when pollinated, can turn into baby tomatoes, but only when the temperatures fall between 50 and 70 degrees overnight. For the most part, those tomato fruits can grow and develop and ripen when daytime temperatures are 90 degrees Fahrenheit or below. I'm sure that there are varieties that are outliers that can develop fruit much better and more successfully when the temperatures are higher, but for the most part, this is a good rule of thumb when choosing your tomato variety. Now, why do I say that? What does the temperature have to do with choosing your tomato variety? When you're selecting your variety, you need to think about the days to maturity. In Southern Arizona, there are 2 times in our warm growing season that provide temperatures within this range and will result in a much more successful tomato growing experience. Those times are early spring, around February, when you put your tomatoes in the ground, and also again in late summer or fall, around August or so, when we usually get our monsoon season. Now keep in mind, every year is different, so just because I said February or August does not mean that is a hard, fast rule. As those times approach, you need to look at the temperatures, both the daytime and the nighttime temperatures, and then follow accordingly. This means that we have about 3 months to go from seedling to harvest in the spring and again in the fall. To do that, we need to choose tomato varieties that will mature quickly, and that is where the type of tomato you select is so important. Time to maturity, or time to harvest, will be listed on the front and or the back of seed packets. Time to maturity or harvest is the time period between transplanting your seedling until when you can pick your first tomato. at least for warm weather things that you will sow inside and then transplant outside. This can get a little confusing. For warm weather things that you would generally start indoors as seeds and then transplant outside, that time period is talking about the time it takes to go from transplanted seedling to your first fruit harvest. But when you're talking about seeds that you plant directly outside, generally that time to maturity or days to harvest means the time period that it takes from germination to harvest. And those will be for things like turnips or carrots or things that you would directly sow as seeds out in the garden. Tomato varieties with short maturity dates or early maturity dates, like between 45 and 75 days, are what you want to look for your best chance of getting a successful tomato harvest. And that's because the lower number of days to maturity will accommodate those 2 short 3-month growing windows that we have in southern Arizona. Does this mean that longer to mature varieties will not produce in the desert? No, absolutely not. I always try some of those types of tomatoes every year with greater or lesser degrees of success. However, if you are just starting out, or if you've maybe had a little bit of bad luck with tomatoes in the past and you need to boost your confidence and maybe grow into your skills when it comes to growing tomatoes in the garden, I would recommend going with a shorter number of days to maturity for your surest bet. I am always experimenting with different tomato varieties. And that's because I am on a mission to find the tomato varieties that grow best in my location, as well as to share the ones that I think will grow well in your location too. So I have got quite a few seed packets here, and it's actually pretty ridiculous, but these are all of the varieties that I am growing to set outside. But I've also got these, and these are very special because these are the tomato varieties that grow well in very small containers, on windowsills, on a light rack behind me if you happen to have those. They grow well in patio gardens and raised beds like my stock tanks. So I'm always looking for tomatoes that will grow well in alternative locations because not all of us have huge gardens or a lot of space. As I've mentioned before, I have gardened pretty much in any place that you can think of. I have grown on windowsills, I've grown on balconies and patios, I've grown in community gardens and containers. So I haven't always had a big garden like this. And I try to keep that really close in mind because I don't want to forget about the fact that not everyone has a ton of space. And I always want to remember where I came from as a gardener and how I can help other people that are growing in different spaces than I am. And I really believe no matter where you're growing, there is always something that will do well in your space, even if it's just a windowsill. And that is what this video series is for. It's for helping you learn how to select the best tomato variety for you, because you're not growing in my garden, you're growing in your garden. So if we can work together to find the very best, then my job is well done. Other things that you need to think about as you're selecting the style of tomato you're growing, whether it be a grape tomato or a cherry tomato or what have you, is what you're using that tomato for. Now, I could have put this in a whole separate video, but I think that it's really important when you're looking for a shorter number of days to maturity to also compare what it is you want to use your tomatoes for. Do you want to freeze them? Do you want to can them? Do you want to dehydrate them? Do you just want to eat them fresh? So those are very important things to think about. When you're looking at tomato varieties with a short number of days to maturity, you don't want to choose a tomato that is best dried when all you want to do is make some fresh salsa with it. And you also don't want to choose a tomato variety that's better to eat fresh if you really want to make sauce and can with it. So those two things I think go hand in hand. Related to that is, do you have the time to preserve it? So really be honest with yourself about your time constraints. Gardening, depending on the style of gardening you do, can take more or less time. So you know what your time commitments are, and you know whether or not you have the time to handle a heavy tomato harvest and to be able to can it or freeze it or what have you. And if you don't have time for that, then picking a tomato variety that is best eaten fresh is probably the better option for you. The next thing that you want to think about when choosing your tomato variety is, where are you growing it? Will you be growing it in a big in-ground bed, in a patio, in a container, a raised bed, on a windowsill. So all of those things can be matched up with a short number of days to maturity. So think about that as you're choosing the style and the type of tomato that you want to grow. The last thing that you should be considering is how much fruit do you want? Tomato plants are not created equally. There are different kinds of tomato plants, and that is a little sneak peek into next week's video. It's the growth habit of certain tomatoes, which equals how much they produce and when they produce. So stay tuned for that. There are a couple of resources that you can tap into when choosing tomatoes, and you can certainly get variety recommendations. Like I have done a couple of videos on my favorite tomato varieties. I will link one of those here. One of the resources for choosing tomato varieties to start with is a local gardener. So I, of course, am growing locally in the Tucson area. You may have other people that you know who are successful at growing tomatoes, and maybe they have a favorite tomato that works well for them. So definitely tap into local gardeners and what their opinion is, because they have been the guinea pig for you so that you don't have to suffer through choosing one that maybe is not well suited for this area. The second thing that you can do is look to local organizations. For example, Native Seed Search is a local nonprofit that focuses on the conservation of seeds of the desert Southwest and Mexico. And they are an excellent resource for getting ideas for varieties of all kinds of different vegetables, not just tomatoes. You can look at what seeds they have for sale on their website to get an idea of varieties that do well in the desert. Native Seed Search has a plant sale every spring and every monsoon season. So if you don't want to or can't or don't have time to start your own seeds, you can always pop in there. They usually will advertise it a few weeks in advance, and you can just select some of the varieties that they have to offer there. Those varieties are going to be very well suited to our desert climate, so that's a great option. In the low desert of southern Arizona, you can start tomato seeds between December and January, and then you can set them out in February and March. Then in the fall, you can start your seeds in July and set them out in August or maybe even early September. But remember to pay attention to the average nightly temperatures as well as the average daytime temperatures, because that is going to be a great guide for you when selecting your tomato varieties as well as when to set them out. Local garden centers will have seedlings for sale a couple times a year as well for the spring and the fall planting, but now you know to look for varieties that have a lower number of days to maturity. So as you're shopping in the local garden center, before you get carried away, I have never been guilty of that, definitely do a quick Google search on the varieties that they have on offer and see what the days to maturity are for those varieties, and then you will be able to select the ones that will do best. Because unfortunately, some of the local garden centers, particularly the big box stores, will sell varieties that aren't necessarily good performers for our area. So you have to do the homework when it comes to buying all kinds of different things, you know, fruit trees or vegetables or what have you, to make sure that you are making a good choice when it comes to growing them here in southern Arizona. To make it easier for you, I have made a worksheet for you. You can list the tomato cultivar, which is the variety. You can list the growth habit, which will be in an upcoming video. And you can list the type, like grape or cherry. And you can also list the days to maturity. So as you're looking through your catalogs or your websites, or maybe the seed packets that you've bought over time, and you want to make a decision about these tomato varieties, you can jot down the tomato cultivar, which is the variety. You can jot down the type, like is it a grape tomato or a cherry tomato? You can jot down the growth habit, which we will be talking about next Friday in our next video, as well as the days to maturity. And once you look at that list, hopefully it will allow you to narrow down which ones you want to plant, because unfortunately we cannot plant all of the tomato types, which I really wish we could. And the second page of that worksheet, I have notes for you to keep track of how your outcomes were for that particular season. So maybe you grew a Punta Banda variety, which is probably my favorite variety for the desert, by the way. And you can make a little note about how it did, or when you planted it, or how productive it was, or other little characteristics characteristics that you want to take note of. So it's kind of like a running garden journal so that you can look at it the next season. I always give myself a little too much credit. I always think, oh, I'm going to remember this or that about it, but then oftentimes I forget and then I have to relearn the same lesson over again. So hopefully this will allow you to save more time and not forget things and be a better record keeper for your garden. You can find the link to that little worksheet down below. It's a free download and you can copy it and use it over the next few seasons if you would like to. I hope that you find that helpful. In the next video, I will be talking about tomato growth habits, like indeterminate or determinate, as well as other characteristics like heirloom and hybrid and GMO and terms that you're going to see, and just to clear the water and make sure that you know exactly what you're looking for, I am going to go through each of those terms for you and what they mean. They are important for knowing what to expect with tomatoes, like when they will produce fruit and will they produce it all at once or over time? Will they be heavy producers or light producers? Will they grow well in a container versus another sort of environment? So all of those terms are very important, and I hope that they will also help you select the perfect tomato for you. I'm Kara from So Arizona. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, happy gardening.